Hello, this is Ann Olson, and I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction for the week one assignments in English 325. I've asked you to read the first 15 pages of the intro in your anthology, plus the Iroquois creation story. And so what I've done is just compile a few notes on some of the more interesting parts, some of the ideas for sure that I'd like you to come away with. The first one is about, uh, well, it's the first paragraph in your reading in the shorter 8th edition of the Norton Anthology. It begins, first paragraph, under Beginnings to 1700. In 1494, a man who had crossed the Atlantic in a large ship returned home to amaze those whom he had left behind with tales of a new world full of marvels. As they listened with rapt attention, the voyager told of things undreamed of, plants and animals, and most of all, strange peoples whose uncanny customs, costumes, and beliefs astonished all who heard him. Now, most of us who've been schooled in the usual way that anthologies and history books present history would assume that this is Christopher Columbus, but it's not. It's actually from Diego Colon, the Taino Indian from the Bahamas, one of 7 natives whom Columbus seized and took to Spain. And what I like about this anthology and about most recent uh, literature trying to be inclusive in the canon is that it asks us to keep aware of the native perspective and of just different perspectives in general. So, before we get to the Iroquois creation story, let's just look at a little bit of a comparison between the Native American oral tradition and the European. For example, the first item in the left column are languages. Less than 3 dozen languages were available to Europeans, and all of them had uh, similar roots in the Indo-European Romance languages. For the Native American, there were over 100 languages, all from diverse, non-similar roots. The Europeans were mostly one religion, Christian, and most of them had just one creation story involving Adam and Eve. And comparing that to the native, there were diverse religions, and there are at least 8 different creation stories. Uh, Even among the Iroquois, when we see the Iroquois creation story, there were 25 different versions of that story. So diversity is just built in. For the Europeans, we come from a print literature. Literature, the word, is based on the word letters, meaning those little black marks that get put on white paper. And we have certain categories of literature. We understand it in terms of tragedy, comedy, the epic, the ode, the lyric poetry. For oral tradition among Native Americans, we would call it orature because you can't even say oral literature. It's an oxymoron. It's based on sounds and performance. Uh, for example, the trickster cycle, personal naming, songs or tributes, the deer songs, hunting songs, dream songs, the curing or blessing songs. Um, so when Europeans first came upon native storytelling or performance, they did not even conceive of native expression as literature. until Romanticism in the early 1800s, when evolution in European consciousness finally made us aware of the power of the creative imagination and emotional thought. Before that, it wouldn't have been even in our capacity to understand. So when we come to translations of oral tradition, there are just so many things we need to keep track of. Um, One is just the physical perception. It's not a translation of one language to another, as in the word table being translated by the word mesa. Those are still just arbitrary marks on paper. Um, there are complications with the eye perceiving words and sounds that were meant only for the ear. Um, I know, the eye is involved in visual cues of performance, but the whole physical conception is different. One thing that might help is to imagine what happens if we just take very literally a translation of a short scene on paper. Let me read this just briefly, and it's a dialogue between two people. The first says, "Start walking, you doggone long-eared galoot." The second says, "Just a minute, partner, you can't talk to me like that. Them's fightin' words." The first person responds, "Yeah, well, I'm a fightin'." The second says, "I dare you to step over this line." The first says, "Okay, I'm a steppin'." The second says, "I dare you to step over this one, this one, this one." Now, just imagine for a minute if that's all we had, no cultural context or hint about who the long-eared galoot might be, but we might just take these words as meaning as setup for a violent scene in which two people are going to fight, maybe to the death. We might we might interpret the second speaker as being a coward who keeps moving the line to dare you to step across this line, this line, this one, um, and see the first one as aggressing and think that we know the outcome of the story. Or we might be lost in the poetic interpretation of repetition. "I dare you to step over this one, this one, this one," as a kind of a song refrain. Can you just imagine scholars talking about the possible interpretations of just this brief little scene? But if we look at the actual performance of this American trickster, yes, it is Bugs Bunny, and you see what is missing if we don't see the actual picture.
Stop walking, you doggone long-eared galoot. Just a minute, partner. You can't talk to me like that. Them's fighting words. Them's fighting words. I dare you to step over this line. Okay, I'm a stepper. I dare you to step over this one. This one. This one. That one. That one. This one.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is not that American Trickster is the same as a Native American trickster, but that language, if we were trying to explain something like Bugs Bunny to someone out of our culture, how difficult would it be and how easy to misunderstand and miscommunicate? Okay, we'll go on to the Iroquois creation story.